Hey team, and welcome back to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we are going to cover magical electional opportunities that we are going to have available to us between our Capricorn Full Moon on July 13th until our Leo New Moon on July 28th. I hope everybody is doing well. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you will forgive me for doing this a little bit more podcast style. I'm kind of recording this and everything as I'm on my way out the door to travel for the weekend. And so doing it this way helps a little bit cut down on time for editing and everything. So please forgive me as I kind of take it a little easy this week, and the cats and I will be back for our next syzygy to talk about those elections for you guys. But today, we don't really have a whole lot going on. There's just not a whole lot of election opportunities to really share or talk about today, which is unfortunate, but I kind of set this up as an expectation in the last video where I talked about kind of the drought that we might be experiencing. I hadn't really looked into it very much at that time, but just with the kind of general knowledge that Saturn is turning retrograde, which means that Capricorn and Aquarius are closed off to us as signs that we can have on the ascendant. Jupiter will be stationing retrograde towards the end of this lunation, which will close out Sagittarius and Pisces. And then we'll have Mercury right now, who's combusted the sun for a while, which closes out Gemini and Virgo. So we have about half of the zodiac on kind of X'd out for what we can utilize insofar as ascendant lords, which really makes things very difficult for us. And then, of course, with those signs closed off, we also have to deal with the moon not being able to apply to Mercury, Saturn, or Jupiter, really. So those are just kind of like really difficult things to dance around. And while that is part of the problem, the biggest problem is really just that the moon is waning in signs, like through signs or through lunar mansions that aren't super great for the waning moon to be in. Like she's just going through several mansions that are much more waxing moon oriented or much easier to do waxing moon oriented magic for, constructive purposes, and the waning moon here is a little bit more difficult to target those more constructive, destructive things that we might typically use it for. So we just kind of don't have a whole lot to go on, and unfortunately that means that a lot of what we do have just kind of repeats from location to location. So this is going to be kind of a little bit of a boring episode in the video, but that's okay because we've had some pretty interesting ones lately. So we could use a little bit of a break. So our first election that we're going to talk about today is actually going to be elections for a 27th Lunar Mansion talisman. And the 27th Lunar Mansion is a little bit of a more interesting one because it's very dualistic in what it accomplishes. It's kind of like the easiest mansion to talk about in regards to like the differences between waning and waxing moon energies, just because it is itself one that is very easily kind of molded into either kind of phase of the moon. It is for this one, because we are of course in a waning moon, we're going to use it for a little bit of its more destructive powers to kind of target those towards things in our lives that we just don't want to deal with anymore. We don't have to have everything in our life all the time, and sometimes the best way to make space for other things is to get rid of stuff that's in our way. So I really recommend using the 27th Lunar Mansion in this regard. We can also utilize it kind of in healing as well, which can be another way to utilize this mansion, or to utilize this election, I should say, in that there are some lunar mansions that operate very well in the waning moon phase for health, and that they help to banish disease or banish illness, to be used a little bit more like preventatively or to help heal. And I think the 27th Lunar Mansion is very good at this. And it's interesting because the 27th Lunar Mansion is kind of like the 22nd a little bit, in that you could use it for healing for both a waning and a waxing moon, but the way that you would use it in a waxing moon is a little bit different. But for the waning moon here, it would mostly be used as a way to keep one from being ill, kind of like the immune booster kind of a thing. So that would kind of be the way that I would more utilize this, kind of banishing of illness, keeping illness out of the home, keeping illness out of the body would probably be the better way to handle it. Or if you didn't want to use it in like a health kind of system, health kind of context, which is fine, then you would utilize it more for banishing negative things that may be coming at you, or banishing negative experiences or habits or things that you no longer want to have holding you back. Banish fear, banish anxiety, banish procrastination, things like that, like things that that you kind of struggle with. for one reason or another, the 27th Lunar Mansion can help you kind of get rid of. But going ahead and taking a look at our elections for the 27th Lunar Mansion, they're all going to look a little similar or kind of bring out the same themes, which is to be expected, but they'll have kind of unique twists on it, we'll say. And for the North American continent, the 27th Lunar Mansion Talisman is going to take place on July 17th at around 4:45 in the morning. This chart here is set for 4:43. And we're going to, of course, focus on the moon here in the 27th Lunar Mansion, conjoined the midheaven. And at this time, she's applying this trine to the sun. Of course, I love sun-moon trines. You know, might as well make a bingo card out of it, I guess. And it can be like the free space or whatever, because I count on me to say it almost every time I can. But sun-moon connections are really great, especially if this is one that you're going to use in more like a healing context, just because the sun is all about the vital force and purifying and cleaning. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant kind of a thing. So that's a really great connection to have here. And one kind of tip, I guess I can share, something that you'll notice a lot, is that the one tip for when kind of everything else is spiraling out of control and a lot of the other planets are not very helpful, because they're afflicted, you know, Cabus retrograde, afflicted by a malefic, something like that, is that you can almost always count on being able to utilize a Cancer ascendant and to get the moon as the ruler of the first house. So you can almost always count on Cancer being able to pull through to be a good sign to put on the ascendant and have the moon as the ruler of the first house. That can be a great thing to kind of work around in an election that maybe isn't working very well. Just make sure that the moon falls in a good house, with Cancer on the ascendant, and that you can work with that. Of course, make sure the moon's not afflicted, which is something that you would always consider. But by making the moon the ruler of the first house, then you don't have to worry about a second planet and what it's up to. And the moon, of course, being in, can't be retrograde, you know, and we never really work with the moon when she's combust the sun anyway. So a lot of kind of our usual things that might disqualify some other planet from being the ruler of the first house won't really apply to the moon. Another part that I really liked about this election, of course, is Venus can join the ascendant here. And that's why I would really recommend sticking to this early Cancer degree for North America if you can get it. To take advantage of that Venus can join the ascendant. Having a benefic planet in the ascendant helps to stabilize the election, make it a little bit more positive, a little bit more easy. And it's just a bonus where we can get it. I wouldn't really say that this election hinges on Venus being here, but you know, it's there, and we would be silly to not take advantage of it. So the Western European, North African version of this chart takes place on July 17th at around 4:47. And this chart is very similarly constructed. The issue, I guess we can say, with this chart is, of course, we have the moon here on the midheaven, and she's applying this trine to the sun. It's farther away. In the North American chart, the moon was at like 14 degrees Pisces. Here she's at 11 degrees, so we're a little bit further away, which means this this trine with the sun happens about 13 degrees out, which is, you know, kind of far. So that's the unfortunate side of this chart. But we're still maintaining the Cancer ascendant here to keep the moon as the ruler of the first house, so we don't have to worry about any other planet beside the moon who is doing well that we have to work with. Now, the big difference, I think, in this chart, aside from kind of the increased gap between the sun and the moon, is that we're no longer really counting on Venus conjoined the ascendant. Right here, she's kind of far away from it, so I would not consider Venus to be conjoined the ascendant here. And the reason why Venus is further away from the ascendant in the Western Europe and North African version of the chart is because if I move the chart backwards to put Venus on the ascendant, at a certain point, I realized that in doing this, I put Saturn kind of close to the midheaven, and I wasn't super comfortable with that. But if that's not such a big deal to you, then you can absolutely do like an earlier Cancer ascendant to get Venus on the ascendant. That's totally fine. I just was less comfortable with like a really angular malefic that's also retrograde and just kind of dysfunctional in this. But if you're more comfortable with that, feel free to use that. Or if you feel like the Venus on the ascendant helps balance it or counteract it or anything like that, then I would say go for it. But I just wasn't super keen on it, I guess we'll say. And then finally, our Australian version of this chart looks very different. Australian charts tend to look very different compared to the other charts. And this one is different because the moon is now on the ascendant, of course. We're dealing with that Pisces ascendant. Jupiter is the ruler of the first house. Jupiter's not retrograde yet, but it is slowing down pretty significantly by now, which is sort of its own thing to worry about. We do have that sun-moon trine. Here now we're a little bit closer than we were in the previous charts. where now we have about an 8 degrees separation, which is much closer, much more obviously an orb than some of the other ones are. So because of this, I actually think that the Australian version of this chart is probably the best one, just because we have that really close. We have a much closer, I guess not really close, but a much closer Sun-Moon trine here than we do in some of the other ones. We don't have to worry, of course, about malefic planets being involved. And so I just really like this intensification of the Sun-Moon trine here. Though I guess you could argue that the Venus conjoined the ascendant at least in the North American version of the chart, where the Saturn's not that angular, helps to kind of make up for it or give it an extra kind of dose of stability or what have you. But I just feel like after a certain point, really kind of like the main issue, I guess, with a lot of Lunar Mansion charts is kind of balancing or weighing out how effective that moon's next aspect is, because after a certain point, the moon is void, and you have to kind of wrap that into your understanding of how the talisman is going to work. So when you get so far out, you really have to kind of take that into consideration, whether or not working with the talisman that has a void moon is worth it, because oftentimes it's not. And so the closer you can get those connections, the better. But it's kind of like once you get within orb, it's really not something you have to worry about. So you just kind of have to follow along with whatever your understanding of orbs of aspects are, or those areas of influence, and work with that. So our second electional opportunity, which will also be shared between all three locations, is going to be for a fourth Lunar Mansion talisman. The fourth Lunar Mansion is Aldebaran, and it is a very destructive mansion that is often associated with like cursing, particularly about generation of anger between two individuals, between two parties, and sort of like the creation of discord and conflict. But what we're going to use it for today is actually pest control. This is usually my typical suggested application of the fourth Lunar Mansion, is to utilize it to control pests. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. And by that I mean kind of your intent behind this talisman can be as soft or as hard as you would like it to be. And that's one thing that I really enjoy about Aldebaran, is that it gives you this sort of range or spectrum of kind of intensity that you can kind of channel and work with. So I tend to be on the much softer side of things and recommend using it with the intention to drive away whatever pest it is that you are dealing with, rather than just like injure or harm, which, is just a personal thing. But it makes the most sense to me and fits most within how I like to operate. So I definitely suggest you do something similar. As a result of it being a more afflicting type of talisman, we actually incorporate a lot of that into the creation of the election for the talisman. And by that I mean we just mess everything up as much as we can. We utilize a lot of those rules that we normally avoid, like the moon being in the fourth Lunar Mansion on the midheaven and applying the conjunction to Mars and Taurus. We never do that unless we're trying to cause some sort of harm or discomfort. At the same time, this is also conjoined... Excuse me, let me remove this. This is also conjoined the North Node, which the moon does not enjoy. And then, of course, this Mars is also applying this square to the ascendant. And the ruler of the first house is the Sun, who is placed in the 12th house, which is where I never want the ruler of the first house to be, unless I'm specifically working on a talisman that is directed to something like this. So basically, our goal is to make the moon and the ruler of the first house as unfortunate as we possibly can, to create sort of like an aura of discomfort that drives away whatever the pest is that we're working against. And, make sure to utilize conventional pest control as well, to just kind of like amplify and diversify your arsenal, I guess we'll say, for whatever it is that you might be dealing with. The sign on the ascendant usually indicates the kind of pest that this talisman is most effective for, with Leo on the ascendant. For talismans like this, you're almost always going to deal with like Taurus or Leo ascendants, just because that's where the 10th Lunar Mansion, the 4th Lunar Mansion is. The 4th Lunar Mansion is in Taurus. So if the moon's on the ascendant, then it's going to be, the Taurus. And if the moon is on the midheaven, like in this chart, then it's going to be the Leo ascendant. But if you want to, you do actually have a little bit of flexibility to get the ascendant sign to whatever kind of thing it is that you're trying to drive away. Usually the main culprits are like bugs, which is more of a Scorpio thing, or maybe like mammals like rodents, rats, mice, rabbits, things like that, which is more Capricorn energy. And then some of the other signs have it, like birds are Virgo or Pisces. People are your humane signs if you just want to, be a hermit. Water creatures are, of course, going to be water signs. Taurus tends to be more like livestock, and Leo tends to be more like wild animals. But feel free to take a look at the chart with different ascendant signs to see what that looks like, if you can use that and kind of help fine-tune it a little bit to be something more what you're looking for. So the Western Europe and North African versions of this chart feature that Taurus rising. Like I said, with fourth Lunar Mansion talismans, you're basically going to have the Taurus rising or the Leo rising, and that's just kind of your options if you're going to fit the Mansion talisman kind of framework. But feel free, like I said, to explore it and utilize different ascendant signs that might fit better for what you're trying to actually work against. And here the moon is in a bit of a more difficult position, so I actually think that this chart is probably more effective than the North American chart at doing its job. And that is because the moon here at 14 degrees Taurus is actually besieged in like kind of really major ways. Not only is she separating from the conjunction of Mars, she's also applying to the square of Saturn, who's retrograde, and conjoined the North Node. So like all the three malefics are involved in this chart here, like the three moon-geared malefics, I guess we'll call it, are really engaged in this chart much more so than they were in the North American chart. So I think this is just a much more powerful warding away, pest control, everything get away from me as fast as you can, make these things uncomfortable and flee from me. Like this is just a much better kind of like fear-inducing kind of energy in it than we had in the North American version, which really only had the Mars as like a really engaged participant, and then the North Node was a little bit further away because it was on the other side of Mars. And then Saturn really wasn't involved in that one very much at all. So this one I think is much better. There's the only thing that is maybe a little bit different, or maybe a bit more positive, I guess, than the North American version of the chart, is that because Taurus is rising, we have to look to Venus, who's the ruler of the first house. And generally we would want Venus to be like in some way in some way afflicted would be what we would want with Venus here. And she's not. Like she's just chilling in Cancer, which is fine. She's kind of applying to the sextile of Mars or whatever. I guess actually to the square of Jupiter would be the next aspect. So we don't really have that difficult Venus placement in kind of the same way that we had the Sun, who was in the 12th house at least, even though he also, other than being in the 12th house, was not very precariously placed. So that would be kind of the trade-off. But all in all, I think the involvement of Saturn and the North Node much more directly in this one makes the Western Europe and North African chart, a much more potent pest control, pest warding type of talisman. So the Australian version of this chart is actually a little bit unique because you could honestly use either and get away with it in a way that you were not able to do for North America or Western Europe and North Africa. And that is because, so we'll go ahead and use this chart, which is set for July 22nd at 7:17 in the morning. And this is like the Western Europe, North African chart where everything was on the ascendant, but it's on the midheavens instead. So what I mean by that is the moon is in the fourth Lunar Mansion, on the midheaven, separating from Mars, applying the conjunction to the North Node, and also eventually to the square of Saturn. So we still have that besiegement happening. It's just now it's happening on the midheaven. This allows us to get Cancer, the sign Cancer on the ascendant, which is a little bit different. So I guess I lied a little bit there, in that in some places in the world, with Taurus on the midheaven this time of year, you can also manipulate it in such a way to get Cancer on the ascendant. So if you're, if you're in a feud with some fish or like crabs or whatever, or cancers, then this can be a great chart to utilize for controlling those pesky crabs and fish and cancers. But it can be utilized for pest control generally. It's just helpful when the ascendant sign matches. It's a little bit more specific. So we have this kind of like big malefic clusterfuck, we'll say, on the midheaven, rather than when we had it on the ascendant. which is fine. Generally, you would want it to be in the ascendant itself, but here it just happens on the midheaven. But with this chart, you actually could have it on the ascendant, which is what I think makes this chart kind of cool, because you can actually put it here, and you can have the moon on the ascendant conjoin that Mars. Now it's kind of gone to the other side of Mars, so now it's applying to Mars. It's further away from the square of Saturn, so we don't have that Saturn really engaged. But you do have the options for putting the moon either on the ascendant at about 1:46 in the morning, or having it on the midheaven, which takes place at about 7:20 in the morning. So Australia gets a little bit more options because the moon is further into the fourth lunar mansion on the ascendant than she was in Western Europe, North America, and North Africa, where I don't think she was able to be. But all in all, just a really great chart here to be able to utilize, take advantage of if you're struggling with any kind of pest situation that is not showing signs of abating. So our final electional opportunity, which unfortunately is only going to be available to North America and Australia, I'm very sorry, Western Europe and North Africa, please don't be mad, is going to be an election for a Sirius fixed star talisman. And now Sirius is a really interesting fixed star. It can do a few different things which seem to be kind of unrelated, which I think is fun. The first thing that's very helpful with Sirius is that it grants favor from people in authority. So it makes people who are in positions to be able to help you more likely to want to help you with whatever kind of situation it is that you're dealing with or you're struggling with. So I usually recommend Sirius a lot, or not just Sirius specifically, but any star or mansion that that talks about getting favors from people in authority. To be useful for, I recommend it for people who are in situations where they're like negotiating career things, because it really helps with that kind of like boss employee kind of energy. But it can also be utilized for other situations where there's kind of like a power imbalance between you and some other individual. So like in legal matters, working with like dealing with police officers, these can be very helpful for making sure everything kind of goes the way that you want it to go and everybody kind of gets out of that situation safely. Sirius is also used to get favor from spirits, which is not really something that I've found to be really necessary. I don't have a lot of direct experience with this because I'm usually one to back off mostly when I feel like a talisman or a spirit is giving me pushback. But I suppose that if you were a more assertive individual than myself, you could utilize Sirius as something of like a recommendation kind of a thing, or like an introduction. It's like, oh, Sirius, help me get in good with your friend. And Sirius can kind of help facilitate that connection, maybe a little bit easier in a way that is maybe similar to, but kind of different from its little brother Procyon. And then kind of one of the more interesting aspects of Sirius is that it talks about, Agrippa talks about Sirius as having power over the spirits of the air, and this isn't really dug into very much. But my interpretation of this line, I could take it either one of two ways. One being about like the spirits of the air as like the element, like the element of air, and so like as being like a star that is connected with the element of air or wind, and then there should be other stars maybe that are connected more with some of the other elements, fire, water, earth, etc. But I would also interpret this, which I think is maybe the better way, as having power over like the weather, being able to influence the weather, to make it rain, to make it be dry, to increase heat, to make it cooler. So I would recommend Sirius in that regard, especially since a lot of parts in the world are experiencing kind of like extreme droughts and things like that. Maybe Sirius can be helpful in bringing some relief to that, but that would be something that I would recommend kind of proceeding with caution, because the last thing that you want is like, Sirius, please bring us rain, and he's just like, all right, here we go, and it just deluge, and that's then you have the opposite problem of extreme flooding, which tends to happen a lot. You have kind of that juxtaposition or that back and forth between extreme drought and extreme floods, which is very destructive, not very helpful. And then finally, Sirius is helpful for repairing relationships. So there's kind of this theme with Sirius, I guess, about relationships, about about facilitating those connections, either between you and somebody who's in authority, you and a spirit, or you and a partner in some way. Sirius, I think, is much better when it comes to repairing like marriages, more long-term relationships, more serious relationships, than it is about like those less serious relationships, the relationships that haven't endured a test of time already. I think Sirius is a little bit more invested in being able to pull out and assist with relationships that have some sort of like formal commitment, whether that's like a ceremonial commitment that you might find in like a wedding, or in like a time commitment is like a couple that's been together for 5 years or something, which is a bit of a different flavor than a couple that's only been together for, you know, a few weeks or months, kind of going through an issue. But all in all, I think Sirius is a really fun star to utilize when we get those options, and we do have that option for North America on July 26th at just after noon at 12:11 p.m. And here we have the fixed star Sirius on the midheaven, which occurs at 14 degrees of Cancer and 14 minutes to be exact, with the moon applying to the conjunction of that star. She's at 11 degrees Cancer on the midheaven in this chart, and she's applying a sextile to Mars and Taurus. And the sextile to Mars is what we are looking for in this chart, because Sirius is a star that is of the nature of Jupiter and Mars. So we would want either one of those planets to be involved in this, and we do have that Mars sextile coming up, so that's very helpful. The Venus conjunction with the moon, I think, is a little bit, maybe not like less helpful, but is less thematically appropriate, just because Sirius is not a star that's of the nature of Venus, but having that benefic connection can be very helpful to stabilize a talisman, make things easier. And of course, we are concerned about Venus's safety anyway, because Venus is the ruler of the first house. Venus isn't afflicted by Mars, not afflicted by Saturn. The ascendant degree is not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. Venus isn't combust. All in all, just a pretty easy chart to work with for Sirius, and it was good to get a fixed star chart in what was basically like a very kind of sleepy time period for talismanic elections anyway. So like I said, Western Europe and North Africa doesn't get a Sirius fixed star talisman because their moon overshoots the ascendant. By the time 14 degrees of Cancer reaches the ascendant, the moon is past it at like 16 degrees of Cancer, so we missed it. We'll have to wait until next time perhaps. But Australia does get an opportunity for it, and this takes place on July 27th at 6:19 in the morning, so you gotta wake up early. And here we have 14 degrees of Cancer on the ascendant, which is the degree in which Sirius is projected to the ecliptic. The moon applies a conjunction to that degree very, very closely, and similarly maintains that sextile to Mars, Mars being a planet that is of the nature of Sirius. So we have that planetary connection that creates like a similitude, continues the theme of the moon working with Mars to bring down the power of a star, which is of the nature of Mars, and kind of facilitate that connection through the various layers, we'll say, of the universe. Just really helps bring that into something really nice. I actually kind of like this chart a little bit better, because both planets are angular. Mars is conjoined the midheaven, the moon is conjoined the ascendant. I think that's really cool. The moon is the ruler of the first house because Cancer is on the ascendant, and we don't have to worry anything about, we want Mars to be involved, and it's a sextile besides, so that's good. Saturn's not aspecting the moon or the ascendant or anything. And like all in all, we're pretty good. We're getting a little close to the new moon, which is never great, but we still have a little bit of time before that becomes like a no-go zone. And when we're working with a star, we get to have a little bit of leeway when it comes to those kinds of connections anyway. But all right, everybody, thank you guys so much for watching/listening. I appreciate you being here and being a little bit lenient with me as I kind of get ready to go handle some other things. Looking forward to seeing everybody's Sirius fixed star talismans, because it's been a little bit since we've had a fixed star talisman, really, so it's nice to be able to have something from this realm. I know the Lunar Mansions, I recommend the Lunar Mansions being kind of like the bread and butter for talismanic elections, really getting that practice in, but fixed stars are nice guests to have, and so hopefully we'll kind of start to see more open up. We just kind of have some unfortunate configurations when it comes to the creation of fixed star talismans. That kind of gets in the way. The North Node is kind of in the way of Algol and Pleiades talismans, which is unfortunate. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity for Mars conjoined Aldebaran talismans when Mars moves into Gemini. That could be fun. Saturn being retrograde conjoined Neb-Algidi is not helping us there, so we're just going to have some unfortunate configurations when it comes to the fixed stars, but hopefully we'll have a little bit more fun working with them a little bit later in the year. But all right, everybody, take care, and I will see you all again and be back on camera with the kitty cats for the Leo new moon.